Okay, hello everybody. This is Robert from your Political Science 201 class, May 2019. In this section, we're going to talk about two things. We're going to talk about Chapter 4, which focuses on the masses, and then we're going to talk about Chapter 5, where we see how the media plays a big role in how politics is run. Now, if we look at, the difference between the rich and the poor, it's gotten very wide in the most recent years. Elites have been gaining status, and we have been remaining kind of stagnant here as the middle class or as workers that aren't elitists. So, real worker wages are basically where they were 40 years ago, even though we have economic growth. Um, we do get paid more. You know what I mean? You got to admit that the minimum wage here in California is almost up to $15 an hour. But as we kind of see the increment or the the kind of the raising of wages in the past couple of years, it hasn't even come close to maybe the reflection of what the cost of living is. And I think that's something that's real comparable is, do you look at wages and cost of living against each other? Because yeah, wages are going up, that's all well and good, but if cost of living is if cost of living is raising at the same or maybe even a little bit more pace, it's not going to matter that we're making more money. It's still going to go to what all our bills and our finances are. One thing that we kind of understand is that 12% of the population belongs to a union. Now, this is surprising because if you think about it, this figure also kind of reacts with how can we determine some of the reasons that deunionization has gone down to 12% in our history, when in the 40s, 50s, it was probably right around 60, 67%. So, what were some of the reasonings for that decline? And I think the author puts up here, employees can threaten to move factories outside of the U.S. in response to union demands. As we know, in areas like Michigan and some other parts of the country, we have seen a fleeing of jobs out of the United States into countries where they don't have to pay them as well, and we lose a lot of factory jobs as a result of that. Also immigration, because immigration feeds a larger pool of low wage workers that might not, are not, legally able to work here, so therefore they don't have any way to collect a bargain. Um, but as we talk about these oligarchical industries and situations here in the U.S., remember that unions also could be a very elitist type organization where you have the few who run the union, and then you have the rest of the masses. And the ones that run it usually are the ones that make the decisions. Okay, so when you get a chance, look at this inequality slide. And when we talk about inequality, the top 20% of incomes in the U.S. receive about 48% of the income, and the bottom 20 receives only about 4%. Um, and poverty here is strongly correlated with a single female heads of households. And as we've seen, women who don't have maybe support, or even, a single parent household has issues with, maybe money and daycare and all that stuff, which really kind of hampers the individual from being able to maybe get a full-time job, maybe 30 more miles away from your house, or be able to work into the late afternoon. So there's a lot of curious questions that come out of that. Wealth is the total value of a person's assets. The book says to be rich today, you have to have $1 billion. I don't necessarily believe that. Here are some of the top wealth holders. As we know, and one interesting thing to look at it would be to see who's man-made here, or who's self-made, and who is kind of inheritance rich. Now, why do we have a dissatisfaction toward politics with regards to our society here. Sometimes we see things that will decline our trust, like the book says here. Watergate, Vietnam, now maybe even the Mueller investigation. It causes us to question authority a bit, or maybe be a little bit more skeptical about what the government tells us. And I think especially when we have scandals and maybe even types of violence, there's always going to be some kind of innate question on whether or not um, we should be supportive or contrary to a policy that is out there. So, those actions that the elites cause will definitely and can definitely pose a way that might decline our influence, and including might also decline the confidence that we have in these people. Um, Changing in the political process is another one. Um, Effects on negative reported media is another one. So we generally have a dissatisfaction with politics. Okay, so I want you to read through the rest of this chapter and see where instances have happened where we've had more tolerance of the masses. We also have a high level of political ignorance, which, if we could see this chart right here, it's pretty self explanatory. The book goes into talking about opinion polls and how sometimes polls can be misleading, and if you don't have the right sample size, it might affect your ability to get consistent results. Or if you word questions incorrectly, that might hamper you as well. So it's just interesting to think about some of the polling questions and how people are able to determine by a reasonable couple percentages the accuracy of what the question was asking. Conspiracy theories, I think we all know what those are. We hear them all over the time. Conspiracy theories can also kind of create a paranoia to government, or a kind of a not, I don't want to say questioning, because we all should question government, but maybe a little skepticism, I think, is the better word with regards to elite action, and maybe we see things that we can't explain, and we automatically chalk it up to conspiracy. People also have a lot of apathy toward politics. Nearly half of the eligible voters do not vote in a presidential election. Midterm elections turn out usually about 35% of registered voters. County elections provide even less than that. Presidential elections, we generally see anything anywhere from 60 to 62%, and that's actually considered good. So, but as long as, after we look at these eligible voters and the apathy, we also got to look at the apathy of people actually participating in politics. Fewer than 1% of U.S. adults ever run for public office, and actually 5%, and only about 5% actively participate. So look at those numbers. Those numbers are pretty striking. What are some of the reasons why? We don't have the time, we don't have the money, we don't have the energy, maybe. So a lot of things can factor into it. Here's a graph of what people do as far as, or what have people done as far as politics and political participation. When we talk about turnout rates, and one high demographic that turns out to vote is obviously the older people. So age is a good determinant of how to try to decide who will participate more. So yeah, age is a good turnout, or good, kind of a factor to look at when you try to determine how many people are going to participate in an election. When I get a chance, look at these look at these links, and it'll show you the presidential election rates for 2016 and who participated in a breakdown. In the U.S., democratic ideals survive in the U.S. because the masses are generally apathetic and inactive. We don't really take any action, but we do have some aspects that might unrest the masses or might frighten the masses. one interesting thing that the book talks about is anxiety to your financial security, which I think is a pretty good um, reason. Maybe your personal safety, or maybe your health, or maybe being isolated. Those things can cause mass unrest. Counter elites can come in and try to become an elite without going through the existing system of achieving power, um, and tendency to resort to violence to achieve the will of the people. So counter elites are people that the masses might have run, or might have used as a means of installing their own power. I mean, their own people in power. So we also have some dangers that come out of it. We have some leftist groups, left-wing extremists that draw mostly from the wealthier, more educated people. Some anarchist groups, some really left-leaning groups that we hear about, Antifa, and some very liberal parts of the political spectrum can be represented by um, these extremist groups. On the other side, if we look at the right wing, obviously the Ku Klux Klan is an example. And in the 90s and even up until today, we have something called militias that might have committed some uh, unreasonable violence in our area. And single issue interest groups are the greatest threat to democracy in the United States. There's usually no flexibility with this, whether it's an animal rights group or environmental group, anti-abortion group, anti-capitalism, um, those type of issues that people get passionate about. We've also seen history of repression. These are some repression acts. We'll talk more about some of them when we go into civil liberties, but how does democracy survive? That's a kind of a rhetorical question, and maybe a question that we could spend a couple of hours talking about. But I mean, it's really a difficult thing to take a look at. So let's now look at Chapter 5. And Chapter 5 basically deals with the media. So those who control the television networks are the most powerful people in the nation, obviously. They, in a sense, will control what's on TV, what's not on TV, what's on the radio, what's not on the radio. And what I'm talking about is content. They can control content, right? To maybe frame it how they want the story to be framed. If you click on here, you'll see some stats about how people get their news, whether it's through most of the times now it's through a cell phone or online. And we see the kind of the level of readership under a newspaper, maybe a physical newspaper, go down in the most recent years. Okay, the media simply claims that their media, the media that they produce, mirrors reality, which is pretty much true. The elites, they have the power to elevate some national issues and ignore others, elevating very obscure people and rewarding some politician and punishing others. So, I mean, we could probably all think of names that tie into this, but for the most part, just know what this myth may be. Here's the 2017 look at the readership of certain papers here in the U.S. So, if we look at a couple of things, the media's political functions, which I think are important. When you go through this, make sure you look at the newsmaking portion, and also interpretation, how the news is interpreted. We have ideological talk shows, whether it's Rachel Maddow or Sean Hannity, or these people that kind of put an ideological spin on their news reporting. But they also give the meaning and explanation of events that happen here in our country. They also socialize us and maybe give us a view that we probably wouldn't see in any other places. They, like I said in the previous slides, it could give kind of they could raise obscure people or obscure issues to the mainstream and get people to understand and read it. Um, but they can definitely socialize us as well as teaching us how to feel about it. Is there something that's making us angry about an issue? Is there something the news media can do to automatically trigger us? They also persuade, they can tell us how we feel. They can tell us how we are supposed to think about a issue and how they can push us to that point. They can also set the agenda, and that's the real power where they can determine what ideas, issues, policies, whatever, what are important to them, and if they think it's important to them, they will, show it. But if they don't think it's important, they can repress it, and that's one thing where the power that the media elites have. We have freedom of the press and everything, but the media elites or the people that runs newspapers or websites or whatever can definitely control what goes in and out with the news. And I think that's something that's very important to understand. Are we being told the whole truth? Maybe in a sense, are we being told too much? A couple of things, right? When we kind of look at television now, television is very entertainment based. Entertainment programs reinforce a negative picture of life in the U.S. Murder is the least common crime in the real world, yet far more covered on TV, and as we've seen in different shows like CSI or maybe NCIS, or maybe some of the Netflix shows like Ozark or Narcos, and how the sex and violence exists in that. Um, but it does lead into a point that's made on this last side where the question is asked of whether or not our entertainment has become increasingly sex obsessed and profanity ridden, which I think it has. And we just can watch anything on the news and or anything on Netflix or Hulu or whatever, and we'll see a more sex based profanity ridden type situation. Television really plays a role in politics. When we see a television malaise, it can increase cynicism and declining votership by kind of triggering that corruption belief that some people think that there might exist and might cause us to not want to get involved. There's some questions about the biases in news. Um, Obviously, MSNBC will focus on more liberal issues, and Fox will focus more on the conservative issues. And they have their own audience and they have their own base, so it's not too surprising on some of the things you will hear out. We'll talk about the Hollywood liberals. The Hollywood liberals play an important role in socializing people to the political world. Just because the Kardashians don't participate in politics, they can definitely influence politics through their followers and the subscribers. So that's an interesting thing to look at. Okay, I'm gonna also want you to kind of know this court case that we're gonna talk about. We're gonna talk about New York Times versus Sullivan, and it focuses on the freedom of the press, right? Um, you know, does the government have a responsibility to make sure secrets don't get out or things that might put our troops in danger might get out? So we need to really look at this and kind of figure out at what point is it the government's responsibility to kind of understand that if they don't want military secrets to get out, they shouldn't let the media anywhere near it. So the easiest thing is, if we want military secrets to be kept secret, they must not let the media fall into the hands of the press. They must not let any type of government issues, military secrets, or whatever get in the hands of the press. Let's have a concept of absence of malice, where we have libel and slander, where libel is a written falsehood, or slander is libel is a spoken falsehood, and slander is no, okay, back up. I'm getting mixed up. So libel is written and slander is spoken. So in order to libel somebody, it has to have been written, and slander is a form of initiating a falsehood with regards to speaking it out loud. Um, these aren't necessarily protected by the First Amendment, right? So we had a case called New York Times versus Sullivan, and it was a defamation case. And one of the things is that is kind of really interesting, that if a public figure is slandered or libeled, it is their responsibility, the plaintiff's responsibility, to show that they were damaged by that talk. And that talk has to have damaged that person's reputation beyond a kind of a reasonable doubt, or kind of beyond a way that shows that there was irreversible harm, and it was done in malice and reckless disregard from the truth, right? The top websites. Now, when we talk about what could be censored, we have an open internet. Try to outlaw indecent and patently offensive material on the internet. The act was struck down in 1997, and the government may not limit the adult population to consuming only what is fit for children. So the FCC is a huge bureaucratic organization that kind of monitors and oversees websites and radio, over-the-air radio, and over-the-air television signals. Between 1994 and 2004, Howard Stern was fined $2.5 million for airing indecent material. There's some things in here. You guys can look it up on your own. A lot of it is detailed on Google. This guy named Bubba the Love Sponge was allegedly killed a pig on air, and it was fined $26,000. A lot of these kind of concerns with this bureaucracy controlling what goes out on the air is the Janet Jackson performance at the Super Bowl in 2004, where her breast was exposed for 9/16 of a second. The FCC originally fined CBS $550,000 for that, but it was eventually overturned by the Supreme Court. Now we have 5-second delays. Saving Private Ryan was a kind of a controversy in the wake of the Jackson Timberlake incident. They wanted to play Saving Private Ryan on Veterans Day, and I don't know if any of you seen the movie, but there's really, really violent images in it, and also there's some bad language. There was some threats from the FCC that they were going to fine stations that showed the program, but ultimately cooler heads prevailed, and the program was allowed to move on without any type of censorship on it. Social media, YouTube, Facebook, Twitter, Snapchat, Instagram, all these are a very effective tool for the public and the politician to be able to talk to each other. And as a result, we have the decline in parties that, due to the media, because the parties do not really necessarily need to be as relied upon as before. Okay, so go ahead and look through the later part of the slides, and let me know if you have any questions. Things are going good so far, so I will see you in a little while.